Look, if there's one thing we know about Sonic soundtracks, it's that the music absolutely slaps every single time. It don't matter how good the game is. It could be Sonic 06 trash, or it could be Sonic Generations peak. Either way, the soundtrack is gonna absolutely hit. At least that's what I would have felt comfortable saying pre-Sonic Lost World. Ever since then, I don't know if the soundtracks just haven't been hitting the same. Sonic Lost World itself had a fun soundtrack, but apart from Windy Hill, since it was used so much, and C-Bomb Segway, that game didn't really have that many standout songs to me. Sonic Boom, okay, we're not even gonna talk about that one. Sonic Forces had potential, but honestly, apart from the Avatars tracks, some of the other tracks just didn't really feel that good, especially the classic Sonic ones. They were really going for that Genesis sound, but it just wasn't done correctly in my opinion. And while Sonic Frontiers was a pretty good return to form, with the island themes being pretty good and obviously the boss battles being super iconic, it kinda dropped the ball on a lot of its cyberspace themes. They all ended up feeling kinda samey. And I feel like part of that is to do with the reused level assets, because every level kind of just felt the same as well, so the music didn't really have the opportunity to stand out. Just to prove this, I guarantee you every single person who played Frontiers can remember the music from level 1-2. And honestly, while it is quite decent, the only reason it became so memorable is because that level got associated with something. It didn't blend in with the other ones because of its super tight S rank. So honestly for me, with Frontiers being debatably an S tier soundtrack, the last time we got a perfect soundtrack where I had no complaints was actually Sonic Generations. Having the more rock-enthused styles from adventure and modern games seep into the classic remixes for modern Sonic really made it stand out, and a lot of them felt brighter and more unique. Meanwhile, the synth-based remixes for classic Sonic really took some of the most iconic modern Sonic music and recontextualized it in a new way that still sounded really nice, but also fit classic Sonic and the authentic feel they were kind of going for. So with the recent release of Shadow Generations, the prospect of hearing new remixes for some of Shadow's most iconic tracks was both scary and intriguing in the same way. I mean, if they could reach some of the peaks that Sonic Generations did with its remixes, I would be utterly thrilled. And after finally getting to experience and play the game myself, I think it's time for me to delve into this one. I'm gonna try and analyze as much as I can about the soundtracks and really give my opinions. But remember, these are just my opinions. So let me hear yours in the comments below as well. And just a quick plug before we get right into this. If you don't know me from my other content on YouTube, my name is Breton Boy, and I make music based around different anime and video games and stuff I enjoy. So music is very close to me, and so is the Sonic franchise. The Sonic franchise music was basically my whole soundtrack growing up. So I'm really looking for what's gonna bring me back to those vibes, you know, but also the future of what the Sonic soundtracks can go. So we're gonna get straight into this. This is gonna be a long one, so strap in folks, tie yourselves in, get ready, and one final warning, this will be covering every single track that I can think of in the game, as much as I can, so this is gonna go over the whole game, so there will probably be spoilers. Alright, you've been warned. Let's do this. So first of all, we're gonna start off with the title screen that actually has 3 tracks that we need to cover real quick. Now, because this game is a bundle between Sonic and Shadow Generations, it has the overall Sonic X Shadow Generations theme, and then it also has the specific theme depending on which game you're choosing to play. Now, the overall title screen starts off with a low rock band vibe before the drop comes in with those Sonic Forces synths we all know and love. I actually really like the vibe here though. It really gets you amped up and ready to absolutely dive into whichever experience you choose. And if you listen around long enough, you start to hear lay motifs of I Am All of Me, which I think is a really cool touch. Now, if you switch to the Sonic Generations portion, you hear a synth Sonic Forces version of It Doesn't Matter. And, you know, it does the job. It's something special, but it's cool that it just has its own kind of thing. But they're really falsifying, I don't know how else to describe it, they're really falsifying the soundtrack of Sonic at this point. It does not fit at all when you go back to the OG Sonic Gen's title screen. Now, I do want to just preface and say that the original Sonic Gen soundtrack is untouched, and when you actually click into Sonic Generations, that title screen music is also untouched. it's only on the menu deciding between both games. Now if you hover over the Shadow Generations portion of the game, you get this really cool remix of the riff of Throw It All Away. It really just sounds like a hardcore evolution of what the original intro was sounding like. So again, it just gets you amped. It just gets you really ready to just dive into this brand new experience. Alright, next we need to talk about the white space music. Now in Sonic Generations, you got this poppy, cheery kind of Genesis sounding music that kind of just fits in the back, you know. It's like, okay, we're here, we're happy, we're about to get into this, happy memories, yay! With Shadow Generations white space, however, you get this more sinister sounding, brooding kind of instrumental. It's actually an almost orchestral rendition of All Hail Shadow that just works so well to set the atmosphere. Like, this is completely different from Sonic Gens. This is Shadow Gens, this is heavy, this is dark. And honestly, it's so catchy that I catch myself thinking about it from time to time. And it's only been what, like a couple weeks since this came out? And it does a pretty good job of not feeling too repetitive, considering you're gonna be in this white space a lot more than in the original Sonic Gens, since the white space in Shadow Gens is more like the open zone from Sonic Frontiers. So you're gonna be spending a lot more time walking around, getting the objectives and stuff. So it's nice that they made a real cool song for this. And since we're talking about white space, just like in Sonic Generations, each level in Shadow Generations has its own white space theme once you approach it. And I'll cover each one as we go through each level. So let's begin with the first level, Space Colony ARK. Now the white space version of Space Colony ARK is pretty much just the slowed down version of the first melody that you hear from Final Rush, which is what the level's music is based on, and not Final Chase, which is Shadow's actual level from Sonic Adventure 2. But I think this was a good choice. I think the Final Rush music is way more iconic and catchy to players than the Final Chase music, so I don't blame them for using it. Now into the actual act itself. Act 1, you agreed with this absolutely pumping banger remix of Final Rush's music. And honestly, the best way I can describe it is like epic trailer music. Like, it really just feels like it should be used for a trailer, so it makes sense that it's the actual music they were plastering all over the trailers. Like, I don't know, I really like this remix. It just screams Sonic Generations to me. Like, if Final Chase was a Sonic level in Generations, I could absolutely hear this. I don't know, I don't think I can glaze this song enough. Like, it's really just a hard-hitting remix. And it has so many different elements to it. It has the original melody that plays, but it's all amped up with these guitars that go absolutely insane. It has the melody that it switches to after with the pumping bass that's just the build up, like boom, 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 boom. And then when that third melody comes in, the it just goes so much harder than in the original, I can't lie. Now something I do need to mention is that partway through a lot of the Act 1 stages, they switch over to Radical Highway because obviously Black Doom just can't get enough of Radical Highway for some reason.
I just think Radical Highway is so cool. What?
So I'm gonna get to Radical Highway's remixes. I'm not gonna talk about it just yet. I'll get there once we get to the big Radical Highway part. Now Act 2's remix, I could take it or leave it. It's a lot more synthy, it's a lot more what you'd kind of expect out of a classic Sonic remix, which I guess they did that because the whole level is in 2D. It's inoffensive, it's nothing I'm gonna remember or come back to, but it's also not something I want to turn off as well. Alright, so next up we have Rail Canyon. And starting off with the Rail Canyon white space, just like the Space Colony ARK white space, it's essentially the first part of the melody looped with a absolutely rock pumping sound backing it up. And I think this is going to be a running theme throughout all the white space intros, so I probably won't spend too much more time talking about them. But this one does sound really nice though. It has that epic, grandiose feel to it, and it gives you a little sneak peek into what Rail Canyon's about to be like. Now for the actual Rail Canyon Act 1, I don't particularly like what they did with the melody in this remix. They almost kind of took the hard rock out of it and replaced it with a different pitched version of it, which sounds more like it's played with an organ. It's a more softer sounding melody and I don't really like that. Aside from that, there's not too much to hate on it though. I do think it's a bit underwhelming though. Now Rail Canyon Act 2 is a whole different story. They actually choose to remix Bullet Station for this act, and I really enjoy this remix. For me, it's the fact that as the song progresses, they gradually tease you with that melody that they know you love and they know that you're waiting for. Like first they hit you with the first part of it, and then you get a little bit more 4 bars after, and then you get a little bit more 4 bars after that, until finally they give you the full thing, and it is so worth it. Now it does sound a bit more digitized, but I actually don't mind it in this version. Overall, I think this is a solid remix, and I see why they used it in the trailer when they were showing off the new version of Rail Canyon. It is way more superior to the Act 1. Alright, next up we get to talk about my personal favorite stage, Kingdom Valley. Now, Kingdom Valley already has my favorite soundtrack out of all these stages featured in the game, in its base game, Sonic 06, so I was really looking forward to what kind of remixes we would get in Shadow Generations. And now first off, we start off with the White Space remix. And honestly, it's kind of similar to all the other ones. You know, it's the first melody slowed and sounding more triumphant. It honestly sounds like something out of Sonic and the Black Knight, and I really like this one. Now when it comes to Kingdom Valley Act 1, they had to go about the task of remixing the original Kingdom Valley stage music. And as I said before, the Kingdom Valley stage music was one of my favorites going into this. So how do I feel about how they approached it? I think they did alright. The original Kingdom Valley stage music, while upbeat, was a lot more somber. Now for Act 1 in Shadow Generations, they took this and they basically just added drum and bass elements to it, which added to the intensity. It makes it feel more full, like there's a lot more going on. And I'm not too mad at it. I don't think it's that much better, but I also don't think it's that much worse. It's decent, it fits the rest of the soundtrack, so I think it's decent. Now honestly, Kingdom Valley Act 2 could essentially just be a continuation of Act 1. It's not that much different, except they do up the drum and bass and the EDM elements in this one, and there's a lot more going on in the background to keep up the intensity. So overall, both remixes are serviceable and fit the vibe of the general soundtrack, but I wouldn't choose either of them over the original Kingdom Valley when it comes to just pure listening experience. In-game though, they fit a lot more. The intensity is a lot more, the boost makes it more intense, so it makes more sense. Now as I mentioned previously in the video, I was not the biggest fan of Sonic Force's soundtrack. It did have some good hits here and there, but Sunset Heights is one I remember being a little bit disappointed by. It was decent, it's one of those that's kind of memorable just by the fact that a lot of the songs are not that memorable. So this was almost a second shot at life for both the stage and the soundtrack. Now did it come back with purpose? Well, starting off with the White Space, again it's the same formula, Sunset Heights beginning melody, and some epic rock drums to get you hyped up, and it does the appropriate job. Now interestingly, when it comes to the Shadow level in Sonic Forces where he goes through Sunset Heights, it's actually not called Sunset Heights, it's called Enemy Territory, and the music that plays is a Westopolis remix. So they just went with the original Sunset Heights music from Sonic's level. And honestly, this one's pretty serviceable too. I don't really prefer it to the original, like they changed the pitch of the main melody and it almost feels like a sequel to it rather than a remix of it, which I don't necessarily mind, but I think I just prefer how the original one sounded. Now for Sunset Heights Act 2, they somehow took the original Sunset Heights and made it even more gamified and even more classicified and even more synthified. And for me personally, it just doesn't make for something compelling to listen to outside of the context of the stage. If you had the option for the original music, I would just play the original music. Like, I don't know how you make a Forces track sound even more like Forces, but they did it with this one, and not in a good way. Now next up we have Chaos Island, and most of Chaos Island's music and remixes come from the second movement from Chaos Island, which seems to be the most iconic one and the most memorable one, so it makes sense why they chose to remix this. And another detail that people might not have picked up on that I found out about while recording this actually, was that they probably chose movement 2 because Shadow has one Chaos Emerald, and after you get one Chaos Emerald in Frontiers, movement 2 starts playing. Coincidence? I don't think so. That was a really good choice actually. For the Chaos Island White Space theme though, I'm not entirely sure that it's the second movement that they remixed for it. I could be wrong, maybe it's just a more twisted kind of version, but it feels a little bit different. Now in Act 1 and Act 2 of Chaos Island, they had to turn an open zone theme into a level theme, and it wouldn't really work chill-wise, so they had to really ramp it up, and of course they added dubstep elements into it and increased the pace of it, which isn't inherently a bad thing, and I do like most of Act 1's track. It's just that one part where they Skrillex it up with the that wasn't for me. That wasn't for me right there. But the rest of it, I really like. It's kind of hard to compare the remixes to the OG since they're in two different contexts, but for the most part, I like the Act 1 remix. Now for Act 2, I can't really say the same. It starts off a bit mellow and then just goes into a fully digitized version of Chaos Island with dubstep, and I'm just not a fan. It just throws me all the way off. It's like the worst parts of Forces and cyberspace all combined into one. I don't like it. I don't like it, okay? Alright, now by this point in the game, you finally get to the final level, Radical Highway. And now this isn't the first time that Radical Highway's got the Sonic Generations treatment. It actually was featured in Sonic Generations 3DS, meaning it already has 2 remixes to go off, that Sega is gonna have to outdo those 2, as well as the Radical Highway original theme. Now just really quickly, my thoughts on the 3DS remixes, they're really good. Like, they are fire remixes. They still add some drum and bass while going for a more industrial and grungy take on it. Honestly, they're the direction I would have loved to see this entire Shadow Generation soundtrack go. But alas, we're in the Frontiers Forces dubstep era, so that's the direction we're leaning towards. Now after Black Doom reaches his full power and turns the whole of white space into doom space, the music changes, and you get this really haunting, intense remix of Great Black Arms from Shadow the Hedgehog. It almost just feels like stuffy, like there's no space anymore. This isn't white space, this is doom space. And the only way you can get rid of it is if you challenge Black Doom head on. Now when you actually get to Black Doom and you go on the level select page, ooh, you get an intense version of Radical Highway with a choir and a bell and an whole ensemble just hyping this up as the final epic showdown that it is. Now just before we actually touch on the Act 1 and Act 2 remixes of Radical Highway, there is one version of Radical Highway that I did say I would talk about right now, and that's from the other stages. Now midway through Space Colony ARK, Rail Canyon and Sunset Heights, Black Doom sucks you up into a version of Radical Highway, almost preluding to this stage. Now that version of Radical Highway is a dubstep version that's different from Act 1 and 2. And this is probably my second favorite version in this game. Yeah, I honestly really prefer it to the Act 2, but the Act 1 is clearly the star of the show. It makes sense why they used it in the trailers, because this one is the ultimate banger out of all the 3 in the game. Out of all the Radical Highway remixes in general, it's not touching the 3DS Generations one. But in this game, Radical Highway Act 1 is the peak of Radical Highway. You can tell they put their whole shadussy into this one. Alright, now that we've covered all the level music, I think it's time we get into the boss music. There are 4 bosses in this game. You have the Bio Lizard, you have Metal Overlord, you have Mephiles, and you have Black Doom himself. Now Bio Lizard was a boss that was already remixed in Sonic Generations 3DS, but honestly, that remix is not all that. And I'm quite happy to say I actually prefer the Shadow Gens remix. They really ramped up the intensity and just the amount of what is going on in the track. They went full on rock with it, and I love it. The guitars are going absolutely wild on this one. And honestly, this might be one of the only remixes that surpasses the original for me. The only thing that's really missing is the vocals. I do kind of wish they kept the vocals in there, but I can understand. When they made it this intense, I can understand why they took the vocals out. The What I'm Made Of remix for Metal Overlord doesn't really change too much. It just sounds a bit more fresh, a bit more clean, and it's got some new drums on it, which I'm not mad at. It's about on par with the original. I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference on a regular listen. Now Mephiles' boss theme, it's a lot more synthy than the original one, and it's not as sinister sounding. It's definitely more like go ahead and get him. Like Shadow is clearly not as afraid or not as fearful of Mephiles as he was in 06. I mean, he doesn't even remember the guy. So it kind of makes sense. And honestly, in the context, I do like this remix a lot. And for the Black Doom or Devil Doom boss fight, you get a remix of Great Black Arms from Shadow the Hedgehog once again. It's a leitmotif that stays around whenever Black Doom is present, so it makes sense. You get phase 1, phase 2, they ramp it up. And then for the final part of the boss where he goes to Neo Devil Doom, you get that All Hail Shadow remix. And honestly, I'm not mad at it. I like it. Now whilst they do add synths into this remix, it's not as heavy as it is in some of the other remixes. And I feel like it really helps to enhance it and give it more of a triumphant feel, instead of just making it all basically sound like Sonic Forces. And honestly, do I think it's the best version of All Hail Shadow? Not really. I think the 06 version is still my favorite version of this song. But in the context of the game and the soundtrack, I think it really works, and I actually do really enjoy it as the last boss theme. Whew. So I think we've covered every single level and boss theme in the game. Now, just before I give my final thoughts on the game, there are a couple more miscellaneous tracks I want to give a mention to real quick. I think the collection room music is pretty nice and melancholic. It's also the music that plays at the end of each episode at Dark Beginnings. So, you know what, it's pretty chill, it does what it needs to do, and I like it. The music for the end credits is just the Radical Highway remix again. So, you know, it's good. It fits, it makes sense, that's kind of the theme of the whole game. And finally, talking about Dark Beginnings once again, that theme Without You was really good. And I don't know why it wasn't in the game. I thought it was going to be in the game, but it wasn't. Hopefully Sega releases it soon so we can listen to it without, you know, Shadow just having a breakdown in the middle of it. But hey man, shout out to Casey Lee Williams and Sega for making that banger and just choosing not to give it to us, I guess. And now, my overall thoughts on the soundtrack. Do I think it's up there in the top 5 Sonic soundtracks? No, I don't really. Do I think it's in the top 10? Probably not. Look, at this point I've come to accept that this is the musical direction they want to take the franchise, so I can't be too mad at it at this point, but I do put this soundtrack above Force's soundtrack and Lost World's soundtrack. It is definitely going to be more memorable than either of those, so I give it props for that, although a lot of that is off the back of the original music. I don't know, I don't mind a lot of the remixes too much, but it does make me think if we got this back in 2011, what would it have sounded like? I mean, we kind of got a taste of that with the 3DS versions of some of the tracks. But yeah, I was kind of hoping that with this being a Generations game, they would go back to how they kind of did it in Generations. But it makes sense. This is the step forward. We've seen it with Forces, we've seen it with Frontiers, and we're seeing it once again with Shadow Generations. They want to take it in this route. Cool, alright. I really hope we still have another turn around the corner. I mean, I think back to soundtracks like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, where they had a multitude of different genres. Each level and stage was so unique. There's so many iconic riffs and melodies, so many different vibes. We had rap, we had R&B, we had drum and bass, we had grunge, we had rock, butt rock, like we had everything. I guess we'll see where we are in another 5 years. If the next Sonic game decides to go down this path again, this genre can be good. I'm just hoping that maybe they can take the extra step to making the original tracks really stand out on their own and not all blend into one. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm know that you like this type of content and you want to see more from me, and I would greatly appreciate it. Are there any other Sonic soundtracks you want to hear me talk about? I would love to talk about Sonic songs and Sonic soundtracks all day, literally. If I get the chance, I will. And also let me know your thoughts on the soundtrack. What was your favorite track? What was your least favorite track? For me, I'd probably say my favorite track is either Kingdom Valley Act 1 or Space Colony ARK Act 1. And for my least favorite, I'd probably say it's Chaos Island Act 2. Like, I can't be a fan of that one, I'm sorry. I do want to shout out everyone who worked on the soundtrack though. They are all talented musicians in their own rights. Whether I fully enjoyed their work on this soundtrack or not, doesn't take away from the fact that they're all super talented and have made some amazing music. Now, that's all from me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!